Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive?
Always up for a good deep dive.
Awesome. Today we're tackling a question that's fascinated humanity for, well, probably as long as we've been around.
Yeah, the big one.
Is there life after death?
It's a question that never gets old.
Definitely not. I mean, we've got articles, books, philosophies, even Professor Shelley Kagan's incredible lectures on this.
Yeah.
So much to explore.
Kagan's a great starting point. He really breaks down complex ideas, makes them accessible, which is what we aim to do here, too.
Exactly. I think for a lot of us, that initial gut reaction is, well, death is the end, right? Like, case closed.
It seems pretty straightforward.
Yeah, totally logical. I mean, even the philosopher Jay Rosenberg argues that the whole question is flawed.
He uses that analogy of finishing a meal, the food's gone, nothing left on the plate, end of story.
Right. Makes you think of that morbid joke, you know, like you don't bury survivors.
Exactly. But here's the thing, Professor Kagan, he kind of nudges us to think a bit deeper. He says we often misunderstand what we even mean by death itself.
Oh, interesting. So it's not just about the finality of it.
Right, we tend to jump to that end state, but Kagan, he wants us to focus on the process.
Okay. So, like, what actually happens when we die?
Yeah, especially bodily death. We think of it as this instant event, but it's not like that at all. It's this whole cascade, the heart stops, circulation stops, then cells start starving for oxygen, everything breaks down. It's a process.
Wow, I never really thought of it that way. So instead of asking, is there life after death? Kagan's suggesting we ask.
Could I still exist after my body dies?
Huh.
It's a subtle shift, but it changes everything.
Yeah, I see that. Because now we're separating the me from the physical stuff, right?
Exactly. And that opens up the possibility that something could persist even after the body's gone.
Okay, now we're getting into some really interesting territory. And that's where these two big contenders come in. Dualism and physicalism. Two very different ways of looking at what it means to be human.
Two fundamental perspectives.
Okay, so let's start with dualism. This is the idea that we're more than just flesh and blood. We have a soul, something immaterial and separate from the body. I think most of us have heard of the soul. But what does dualism actually mean in a philosophical sense?
Well, dualism says that we're made of two parts. We have the physical body, and then we have this non-physical soul.
And the soul is,
What exactly?
it's kind of like the seat of consciousness, your thoughts, your personality, everything that makes you, well, you.
So if the soul is non-physical, it's not bound by the same laws that govern our bodies, right? Meaning maybe it could survive bodily death.
That's the core idea. It's like, think of you in your house.
Yeah.
Even if your house is destroyed, you still exist,
Right.
right? You're separate.
Yeah, that's a helpful analogy.
Though Kagan, he's careful to point out that a person is the soul. It's not like you're a soul plus a body.
Okay, so the soul is essentially what makes you you, but it's not an additional component. It's like your essence.
Right. It's a subtle but important distinction. They're connected but not the same thing. Got it. So that's dualism. Now, for something completely different, physicalism. This one might be a bit tougher to swallow for some because it essentially says we're incredibly complex biological machines.
Amazing machines, though.
Oh, absolutely. Does this mean, like, I can get a RAM upgrade for a better memory?
Haha, I wish. But seriously, physicalism argues that everything about us, our thoughts, our emotions, even consciousness, it all comes from the physical workings of the brain.
So no mystical component,
Yeah.
just biology, albeit incredibly advanced biology.
That's the gist. Kagan, he uses this comparison. A piece of chalk, a cell phone, and a human being.
Okay, I'm intrigued. All physical objects, but
Vastly different capabilities. The chalk can't do much, cell phone's a bit more complex. And then there's us, capable of language, art, love, incredible things.
right. So physicalism saying those abilities don't require a separate soul. It's all happening in our brain.
Exactly. Our brains are the source of all that makes us human.
But doesn't that make us, I don't know, just automatons? Where's the room for free will, for feeling like a distinct self?
That's a big question people wrestle with. But physicalists would say free will, the sense of self, these are emergent properties of complex systems like our brains. Like how individual ants are simple, but together they create complex colonies.
I see. Okay, so we have these two radically different views. Dualism with its immaterial soul, and physicalism with its focus on the physical brain. Which one is right?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And philosophy, unlike math, it doesn't always have neat and tidy answers. But the beauty is, by examining both sides, we start to see ourselves and the world in new ways.
And to add another layer to all of this, one of the most enduring arguments for the soul and its immortality comes from well, way back in ancient Greece, from Plato. And that's where we're headed next, ready for a time-traveling adventure.
Let's do it. Plato's Phaedo, it's a classic for a reason.
All right, so get ready to dive into some ancient wisdom as we explore Plato's ideas on the soul and its potential for immortality. It's going to be a fascinating journey.
So Plato, he presents this whole dialogue almost like a play.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about that. With Socrates, as the main character.
Right.
And it takes place on Socrates' last day. Like he's in his prison cell.
Whoa.
About to, face his own death.
Heavy stuff.
Yeah. But he does it with this, incredible courage and this clarity of thought. It's amazing.
I'm intrigued, but I gotta be honest, sometimes, ancient Greek philosophy, it can be a bit intimidating.
I get it.
But I'm ready for the challenge.
We'll break it down together.
Rare.
So in this dialogue, Phaedo, Socrates, and his friends, they're all gathered in his cell.
Okay.
And they're discussing, life, death, the whole shebang.
Yeah.
The possibility of an afterlife.
Wow. So how does Socrates, guided by Plato's thinking, make the case for this, the soul's immortality?
He lays out, a series of arguments that kind of build on each other.
Got it.
One of the central ideas is this: the soul's purity.
Purity.
And its unchanging nature, which he contrasts with, the physical world, which is always in flux, always changing. Right. Everything's always, decaying, falling apart in the physical world. Yeah. So it kind of makes sense that if the soul is this, perfect, eternal thing.
Exactly.
It wouldn't just, poof, disappear when the body dies.
Yes, that's the line of reasoning.
Okay.
Plato, he argues that the soul, it's immaterial.
Okay.
It belongs to this realm of forms,
Forms.
Like perfect, eternal concepts.
Oh, okay.
So being immaterial, it can't be destroyed by, mere physical death.
Right. It's like saying you can't destroy an idea with a hammer.
Exactly. Our souls, they're made of different stuff than our bodies. They exist on a whole other plane, you could say.
This reminds me of those near-death experiences people talk about. That feeling of floating above their body, observing things.
Yeah.
Could that be the soul detaching, even if it's just temporary?
It's a fascinating connection to make.
Yeah.
Of course, we can't, take anecdotal accounts as scientific proof.
Right, of course.
But they do raise some interesting questions about consciousness, about the soul-body relationship.
For sure. Definitely food for thought. So Plato, he argues for this, the soul's immortality.
Yeah.
But does he say anything about what happens to the soul after death?
He suggests it's a process of judgment.
Judgment.
Yeah. So the soul, it's either rewarded or punished based on, the actions of its earthly life.
Kind of like a karma system.
Yeah, you could see it that way.
Interesting.
Plato's ideas, they laid the groundwork for various interpretations of the afterlife. But he doesn't, explicitly endorse any specific beliefs,
Right. It's amazing how these ideas from thousands of years ago are still so relevant today.
Absolutely.
These big questions about life and death, they really stick with us.
I think it speaks to the power of philosophy. By engaging with these questions, even if we don't find definitive answers, we deepen our understanding.
Of ourselves.
Yeah, of ourselves, our place in the universe, the meaning of life.
It's a journey.
It is. Before we wrap up with Plato, I think it's worth circling back to Professor Kagan for a minute.
Okay, yeah.
He brings up a crucial point. Even if we accept dualism, this idea of the soul being separate, there's still another hurdle to clear when it comes to life after death.
Oh, with that?
He highlights that just being immaterial, it doesn't automatically guarantee the soul's indestructibility.
Wait, what? So even if I have a soul, it's not a guaranteed ticket to the afterlife?
Not necessarily. Remember, dualism suggests there's this two-way interaction between the soul and the body.
Right, like how a physical injury can cause us emotional pain.
Yeah.
Or our thoughts can, lead to physical actions.
Exactly. So it's possible that the physical process of death could impact the soul as well, even leading to its destruction.
So even with a soul, death could be the end for both body and soul. That's kind of a bummer.
It's a challenging thought for sure.
Yeah.
But remember, it's just one possibility within the dualist framework.
Okay, so we've got a lot to ponder. Do we have souls? If so, can they survive bodily death?
Mm-hmm.
And if they can, how long do they last?
Yeah.
Forever.
Mm-hmm.
These are some pretty weighty questions.
They are. And I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
Yeah, for sure.
But that's the beauty of philosophy, isn't it? It invites us to explore, to question, to delve into these profound mysteries, even if, those definitive answers remain elusive.
Absolutely. And speaking of exploring, next time, we're going even deeper into Plato's Phaedo. We'll see how he really tries to convince us that the soul is immortal.
It's going to be fascinating to unpack his arguments.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
All right, so back to the Phaedo. What exactly did Plato find so convincing about the soul's immortality? Like, what were his main arguments?
Well, one that really stands out is this idea of opposites. Plato, he believed that everything comes into being from its opposite.
Okay, so like hot comes from cold, light from dark.
Exactly. And he applies this logic to life and death.
So life springs from death and death from life.
Yeah, creating this like continuous cycle.
Whoa. So death isn't the end, but a transition back to life. In some form, I guess.
That's the idea. The cyclical view of existence, it was central to how he understood the soul's journey.
This makes me think about people who claim to remember past lives. Is that something Plato addresses in the Phaedo?
He doesn't talk about past life memory specifically, but his concept of the soul's immortality and this cyclical journey, it definitely like leaves room for that possibility.
Yeah, it's definitely fascinating to think about. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
From Kagan's modern take on death to Plato's ancient arguments for the soul's immortality. Anything that's particularly resonated with you?
I think what strikes me is how both Kagan and Plato, even though they're separated by like thousands of years, they both encourage us not to shy away from these big questions,
Yep.
to engage with them, wrestle with them, even if we don't find, those absolute definitive answers.
It's about the journey,
Yeah,
the exploration.
exactly. And, expanding our understanding along the way.
Couldn't agree more. So, to everyone listening, keep those minds curious, keep those questions coming. Until next time, happy deep diving.